Well, here I am again, sitting in my comfortable observation pod aboard the Galactic Council's flagship, watching another species get the boot. You'd think after 3 centuries of diplomatic service, I'd be used to this routine by now. But humans? Oh, humans are special. Special in that particularly irritating way that makes you want to bang your head against the nearest bulkhead. My name is Vex9, and I'm what you might call a political observer for the Council. Think of me as a cosmic referee, except instead of sports, I watch entire civilizations rise and fall. Today's entertainment? The expulsion of Earth from the Galactic Council. Again. Order in the chamber. Ambassador Cleth's voice boomed through the council hall, his forearms waving frantically like an oversized octopus having a seizure. The Zolani always did have a flair for the dramatic. I adjusted my position, watching through the transparent viewing panel as the representatives from 600 different species settled into their respective seats. The energy in the room was electric, crackling with anticipation. Nothing quite like a good old-fashioned political exile to get everyone's blood pumping. "We are here today," Cleth continued, his voice dripping with that particular brand of condescension that politicians across the galaxy seem to master, to address the continued violations committed by the human delegation. Ah yes, the violations. Where do I even begin? In the past solar cycle alone, humans had managed to start 3 trade wars, accidentally triggered a minor diplomatic incident involving stolen exotic matter, and somehow convinced an entire sector of peaceful agricultural worlds to form their own defense pact. The nerve of these primates. Ambassador Sarah Mills stood up from the human delegation section, her auburn hair catching the artificial lighting of the chamber. She was new to this role, having replaced the previous ambassador after what the humans called aggressive negotiations with the Corvani Empire. The Corvani, for their part, refused to explain why their trade minister was found hiding in a supply closet, muttering something about terrifying bilateral agreements. Honorable council members, Sarah began, her voice carrying that distinctly human quality I'd learned to recognize over the years, in confidence mixed with just a hint of barely controlled chaos. Earth stands by every action we've taken. We've operated within the bounds of galactic law. A collective groan rippled through the chamber. Technical compliance with galactic law was something humans had turned into an art form. They followed the letter of every regulation while somehow managing to violate the spirit of everything the Council stood for. The law, yes, hissed Representative Sithara of the Serpentine Coalition, her scales shifting to an agitated purple. But what about the Krell incident? Oh, the Krell incident. Even I had to admit that one was impressive in its sheer audacity. The Krell hegemony had been the galaxy's dominant military power for over 2 millennia. Their fleets were legendary, their technology advanced, their strategy unmatched. Then humanity showed up with what they called asymmetric warfare. Sarah smiled, and I swear I could feel the temperature in the room drop a few degrees. The Krell declared war on us. We simply responded in kind. You turned their own moon into a weapon. Sithara's voice rose to a near shriek. We redirected an asteroid using their own gravitational manipulation technology, Sarah corrected calmly. Completely legal under Article 47B of the Warfare Accords. I couldn't help but chuckle. Redirected an asteroid. Such a delicate way to describe what amounted to dropping a rock the size of a small city onto the Krell's primary shipyard. The humans had studied Krell technology for exactly 3 months before figuring out how to turn it against them. The war lasted 6 weeks. And the Merchant Guild? Piped up a voice from the economic sector representatives. What about them? Sarah asked innocently. You bankrupted them. We offered competitive pricing. Competitive pricing. Another beautiful euphemism. Humans had analyzed the Guild's monopolistic practices, identified every inefficiency in their supply chains, and then undercut them so aggressively that half the galaxy's trade routes shifted overnight. The Guild had controlled interstellar commerce for 800 years. Humans dismantled their empire in 18 months using nothing but superior logistics and what they called aggressive customer service. Ambassador Cleth was turning an interesting shade of green, which for a Zilani usually indicated extreme frustration. The point, Ambassador Mills, is that your species has demonstrated a complete inability to integrate peacefully into galactic society. Define peacefully, Sarah shot back. And there it was, the question that had been lurking beneath every interaction between humans and the rest of the galaxy. What exactly did peaceful integration look like? Because from where I sat, humans had been remarkably peaceful. They hadn't started any wars, they'd just finished them very efficiently. They hadn't destroyed any civilizations. They'd simply outcompeted them in every conceivable arena. You know exactly what we mean. Cleth's voice was reaching that pitch that made nearby crystal formations vibrate. Your species is disruptive. Disruptive, Sarah repeated thoughtfully. Interesting choice of words. The chamber fell silent. Even I leaned forward in my observation pod. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The humans had been building toward something for months now. Trade agreements that made no immediate sense, scientific exchanges that seemed one-sided, military partnerships with species nobody had heard of. The pieces were scattered across the galaxy, but nobody had put them together yet. Nobody except the humans, apparently. You want to talk about disruption? Sarah's voice carried across the chamber with crystal clarity. Let's talk about the status quo you're all so desperate to protect. She gestured toward the economic sector representatives. The Merchant Guild controlled 90% of galactic trade through artificial scarcity and price manipulation. Millions of worlds went without basic resources while they maintained their profit margins. Her gaze shifted to the military representatives. The Krell hegemony maintained peace through fear and overwhelming force. Peaceful species paid tribute to avoid annihilation. Finally, she looked directly at Cleth. And the Council. The Council maintained order by ensuring that no single species could ever challenge the established hierarchy. The silence in the chamber was deafening. It was the kind of quiet that preceded either enlightenment or violence, and in galactic politics it was often difficult to tell the difference. We followed your rules, Sarah continued. We joined your council. We participated in your economy. We integrated into your society. And what did we find? She paused for effect, and I had to admire her timing. Pure theater. We found a galaxy where innovation was discouraged, where progress was stifled, where entire civilizations were kept in artificial stasis to maintain someone else's power structure. That's preposterous, Cleth sputtered. Is it? Sarah asked. When was the last time a new species was allowed to join the council? When was the last time trade routes were updated to benefit developing worlds? When was the last time military doctrine evolved beyond bigger ships, more guns? The questions hung in the air like accusations, because they were accusations, and worse, they were accurate ones. Your point, Ambassador Mills. Sithara's voice was dangerously quiet. My point is that you're not expelling us because we broke your rules. You're expelling us because we exposed how broken your rules are. The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted over each other in dozens of languages, translation systems struggling to keep up with the cacophony. Cleth was banging his gavel so hard I was genuinely concerned for the structural integrity of the podium. But through it all, Sarah just stood there, calm as a lake before a storm. Order, order. Cleth finally managed to restore some semblance of quiet. The vote will proceed as scheduled. All in favor of expelling Earth from the Galactic Council. Hands, tentacles, claws, and various other appendages rose throughout the chamber. The count was overwhelming. Of the 637 species represented, only 12 voted against expulsion. Even some of humanity's allies had abandoned them. The motion passes, Cleth announced with evident satisfaction. Earth is hereby expelled from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. You have 72 standard hours to vacate all Council facilities and remove your presence from Council space. Sarah nodded once, calmly gathering her materials. Understood. We'll be gone within the hour. Within the hour? That was unusually efficient, even for humans. However, Sarah continued, and every being in the chamber froze. I should probably mention that Earth has been quite busy during our membership in the Council. Oh no, I could feel it coming. That particular brand of human surprise that had made me very, very good at my job over the years. Busy how? Cleth asked, though his tone suggested he really didn't want to know. Sarah smiled, that same calm smile that had preceded every major human diplomatic victory in the past 5 years. Well, it turns out that when you're not allowed to challenge the established order directly, you have to get creative. She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Star maps, trade routes, alliance networks, resource flows. The data was staggering in its complexity and scope. You see, while you've all been focused on maintaining the status quo, we've been building something new. The hologram shifted, highlighting systems that hadn't been on anyone's political radar. Hundreds of them. Thousands. The Outer Rim Alliance, Sarah announced casually, as if she were discussing the weather. 1,743 independent systems. Combined population of over 800 billion beings. A combined industrial capacity that exceeds the current council by approximately, 300%. The silence in the chamber was no longer tense. It was terrified. You see, all those species you've been ignoring. All those worlds you deemed too primitive for council membership. All those civilizations you kept locked in artificial stagnation. They were quite interested in alternative arrangements. I was frantically pulling up my own intelligence reports, cross-referencing the data Sarah was presenting. How had we missed this? How had nobody seen this coming? The answer was depressingly simple. Nobody had been looking. The Council had become so focused on managing existing members that they'd completely ignored the rest of the galaxy. Impossible, Sithara whispered. The logistics alone are surprisingly manageable when you're not constrained by 8 centuries of bureaucratic inefficiency, Sarah replied cheerfully. Amazing what you can accomplish when your primary goal is actually helping people instead of maintaining power structures. Cleth was staring at the holographic display like it was showing him his own death warrant. Which, in a way, it was. This is. Legal, Sarah finished helpfully. Every alliance, every trade agreement, every mutual defense pact. All completely within the bounds of galactic law. We checked very carefully. Of course they had. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was finding the loopholes in other people's systems. What do you want? Cleth asked quietly. Want? Sarah looked genuinely puzzled. We don't want anything from you. We're leaving, remember? You voted us out. She began walking toward the exit, her delegation falling in behind her. But Ambassador Mills called out Representative Vorthak of the Mining Consortium. Surely we can discuss terms. Trade agreements? Mutual cooperation? Sarah paused at the chamber entrance, looking back over her shoulder. That's an interesting proposal, Representative Vorthak. I'll have to discuss it with the Alliance Council. The Alliance Council? Oh yes, we're very democratic. Every member species gets a voice in policy decisions. It's quite refreshing after years of being told what we could and couldn't do. The implications were staggering. The Council had just expelled the diplomatic representative of what was effectively a rival galactic government. A rival government that controlled more territory, more resources and more population than they did. This won't stand, Cleth declared, though his voice lacked conviction. The Council will never recognize this alliance of yours. Sarah's smile was bright and utterly terrifying. That's perfectly fine, Ambassador Cleth. We don't need your recognition, but you might want to consider something. She gestured toward the holographic display, which was still showing the vast network of alliance systems. Right now, the Outer Rim Alliance is committed to peaceful coexistence with the Council. We have no territorial disputes, no conflicting claims, no reason for hostility. We're simply offering an alternative to species who want something different. The word alternative carried weight in the chamber, because alternatives were exactly what the Council had spent centuries preventing. However, Sarah continued, if the Council were to take aggressive action against Alliance members, well, we've learned a great deal about defensive strategies from our interactions with the Krell and others. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. The humans had proven their capability against the galaxy's most powerful military force. What could they do with the resources of 1700 systems behind them? This is blackmail, Sithara hissed. This is business, Sarah corrected, and right now business is very good. She turned to leave, then paused again. Oh, one more thing. The trade routes through Council space. The ones that connect the outer rim to the core worlds, those belong to us now, purchased legally through standard commercial transactions over the past 2 years. The color drained from every face in the chamber that was capable of color draining. Have a pleasant day, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to address the Council one final time. With that, she was gone, her delegation filing out behind her with the calm efficiency that had made humanity simultaneously the most successful and most terrifying species in recent galactic history. I sat in my observation pod, reviewing the data streams and trying to process what I'd just witnessed. In the space of 30 minutes, the political landscape of the galaxy had shifted more dramatically than it had in the previous 3 centuries. Below me, the chamber was in absolute chaos. Representatives were shouting at each other, demanding explanations, making accusations, calling for emergency sessions. But none of it mattered anymore. The humans were gone, and they'd taken half the galaxy with them. I leaned back in my chair and couldn't help but laugh. After 3 centuries of watching civilizations rise and fall, I'd finally seen something truly extraordinary. Humanity hadn't just been expelled from the Galactic Council. They'd graduated from it. 3 months later, I found myself in the most unlikely place imaginable, aboard a human vessel, heading toward what they called New Geneva Station. The irony wasn't lost on me that the galaxy's newest superpower had named their capital after some obscure Earth city that most species couldn't even pronounce properly. The invitation had arrived through official diplomatic channels, which was remarkable considering the Council no longer recognized the Outer Rim Alliance as a legitimate government. But then again, legitimacy was becoming a rather flexible concept these days. Captain Elena Vasquez met me at the airlock, her uniform crisp and bearing insignia I didn't recognize. The Alliance military had apparently developed their own rank structure, independent of any existing galactic standard. "Observer Vex-9, welcome aboard the Determination," she said with that peculiar human custom of extending her hand for physical contact. I'd learned to tolerate this ritual, though it still seemed unnecessarily intimate. "Thank you, Captain. I confess I'm curious about this summit your government has called." Elena's smile was the same kind I'd seen on Sarah Mill's face months ago. Polite, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. "Oh, you'll find it quite educational. The Admiral is looking forward to meeting you." Admiral. The humans had established a military hierarchy now. This was developing faster than anyone had anticipated. As we walked through the ship's corridors, I couldn't help but notice the differences from standard Council vessel design. Everything was more compact, more efficient. The crew moved with purpose rather than the leisurely pace I'd grown accustomed to on Council ships. "Impressive modifications," I commented, running my sensor appendages along a wall panel. "Actually, this isn't a modification," Elena replied casually. "This is original Alliance construction, built in the shipyards at Kepler Station." I stopped walking. "You have shipyards?" 17 of them, actually. The industrial capacity of the Alliance has been quite remarkable. When you remove artificial constraints on production and trade, civilizations tend to flourish. 17 shipyards. The Council had 3, and one of those was primarily for maintenance. How had they managed this so quickly? "The secret," Elena continued as if reading my thoughts, "is collaboration instead of competition. When species work together toward common goals, rather than fighting for limited resources in a rigged system, efficiency increases exponentially. We entered what appeared to be an observation deck, and I got my first clear view of New Geneva Station. My vocabulary suddenly seemed inadequate. The station was massive, easily dwarfing the Council's primary facility. But more importantly, it was busy. Ships from dozens of species I recognized, and several I didn't, moved in carefully orchestrated patterns around the station, loading cargo, transferring passengers, conducting what appeared to be routine diplomatic exchanges. "How many species are represented here?" I asked, trying to keep the awe out of my voice. "Today?" "About 230, though membership continues to grow. 230 species. The Council represented 637, but most of those were effectively silent partners with no real voice in governance. The Alliance, by contrast, seemed to operate on actual democratic principles. "Captain, we're receiving clearance for Docking Bay 7, came a voice over the ship's communication system. "Acknowledged. Take us in." As we approached the station, I noticed something that made my sensory organs tingle with anxiety. Defensive platforms, lots of them. And they weren't the bulky, outdated designs favored by Council military doctrine. These were sleek, efficient, and numerous enough to make any attacking force reconsider their life choices. "Security seems robust," I observed. "The Alliance takes the safety of member species very seriously," Elena replied. "We've had some interesting visitors lately." Interesting visitors. That was a diplomatically elegant way of describing the Council reconnaissance missions that had been probing Alliance space for the past month. Missions that had all returned with detailed reports of defensive capabilities that made even the Krell military leadership nervous. We docked without incident, and Elena escorted me through corridors that buzzed with activity. Representatives from species I hadn't seen in decades mingled freely with others I'd never encountered. The energy was infectious, reminding me of the early days of the Council before bureaucracy had calcified into tradition. "Observer Vex 9? A voice called out in accented Galactic Standard. I turned to see a being I recognized immediately, Ambassador Thyrix of the Andorian Collective. The Collective had been one of the species denied Council membership 3 centuries ago for being too technologically primitive. They didn't look primitive now. Ambassador Thyrix. I wasn't aware the Collective had joined the Alliance. 6 weeks ago, Thyrix replied with obvious pride. "Best decision we've made in generations. Our technological development has advanced more in the past month than in the previous century." Before I could respond, Elena was guiding me toward what appeared to be a conference chamber. The doors opened to reveal a circular room with seating arranged in concentric rings, ensuring every participant had an equal view and voice. It was the opposite of the Council's hierarchical amphitheater design. "Observer Vex 9, welcome to the Alliance Council." The voice belonged to a human I didn't recognize, though his bearing suggested military background. He was tall, with graying hair and the kind of calm confidence that came from having faced down impossible odds and won. "Admiral Marcus Webb," he introduced himself. "Alliance Defense Coordinator." Defense Coordinator, not Supreme Commander or military dictator. Another subtle difference that spoke volumes about how the Alliance operated. "Admiral Webb. I'm honored by the invitation, though I confess uncertainty about the purpose of this gathering." Webb's smile was different from the ones I'd grown accustomed to seeing on human faces. This one actually reached his eyes. Transparency, observer, something that's been sorely lacking in galactic politics for far too long. He gestured toward the assembled representatives, and I realized I was looking at the governing body of what amounted to a new galactic civilization. Species I recognized sat alongside others that were completely foreign to me, all of them participating as equals. 3 months ago, Earth was expelled from the Galactic Council. Webb began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Today we want to discuss what comes next." A Zilanian representative raised one of his 4 arms. "Admiral, the Council has been making overtures about renewed trade relationships. How should the Alliance respond? Carefully, Webb replied. The Council spent centuries maintaining artificial scarcity to control member species. We need to ensure any agreements serve Alliance interests, not Council desperation. A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. These weren't subjugated peoples grateful for scraps from the Council's table. These were partners in a genuine coalition. But what about military concerns? Asked a representative from a species I didn't recognize. Council forces still outnumber US significantly. Webb's expression didn't change, but something in his posture suggested amusement. Do they? He activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Fleet positions, ship counts, technological assessments. The data was comprehensive and frankly alarming. The current Council naval assets, approximately 47,000 active vessels across all classes. Current Alliance naval assets, approximately 31,000 vessels. The numbers seemed to favor the Council until Webb continued. However, Alliance vessels average 43% newer construction, incorporate superior defensive technologies, and operate with integrated command structures that increase combat effectiveness by an estimated 60 to 70%. He paused to let that sink in. More importantly, Alliance forces are distributed across 1,700 systems, making any coordinated attack logistically impossible. Council forces are concentrated around 300 systems, making them vulnerable to the kind of asymmetric warfare humans have become quite good at. I was frantically taking notes, trying to process the implications. The Alliance hadn't just matched Council military capability, they'd potentially exceeded it while maintaining a defensive posture that made them effectively unconquerable. But surely, I interjected, the Council wouldn't consider military action. The political ramifications alone would be manageable if they could achieve quick victory, Webb replied calmly. Unfortunately for them, quick victory isn't an option. He changed the display to show what appeared to be tactical simulations, fleet engagements, planetary sieges, resource interdiction scenarios. The results were consistent. Any Council military action would result in a prolonged conflict with uncertain outcomes and guaranteed catastrophic losses. The Council is facing a choice, Webb continued. Adapt to the new reality or attempt to maintain the old order through force. We're hoping they choose adaptation. And if they don't? Asked the Andorian representative. Webb's smile disappeared entirely. Then they'll learn why humanity was expelled from the Council in the first place. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. I was beginning to understand that human diplomatic politeness was often just a thin veneer over something much more dangerous. However, Webb said, his tone lightening, we prefer cooperation to conflict. Which brings us to why you're here, Observer Vex 9. All attention turned to me, and I suddenly felt very exposed. I'm not sure I understand. The Alliance would like to propose a formal treaty with the Galactic Council, recognition of sovereignty, establishment of trade protocols, mutual defense agreements where appropriate, standard diplomatic framework. I blinked several times, trying to process this. You want formal recognition? We want peaceful coexistence, Webb corrected. Recognition would simply make that easier to achieve. It's a treaty between the Council and the Alliance. It would effectively legitimize the existence of a rival galactic government, something the Council had spent centuries preventing. I'm not sure the Council would be receptive to such a proposal, I said carefully. Perhaps not initially, Webb agreed. But circumstances have a way of changing perspectives. The display shifted again, showing economic data that made my sensory organs ache. Trade flows, resource distribution, industrial output. The Alliance wasn't just militarily powerful, they were becoming economically dominant. 40% of rare mineral extraction now occurs in Alliance space, Webb explained matter-of-factly. 60% of agricultural surplus production, 70% of advanced manufacturing. The implications were staggering. The Council's economy was becoming dependent on Alliance resources, whether they acknowledged it or not. The choice facing the Council is simple, Webb continued. Formalize the relationship that already exists, or watch their civilization slowly strangle itself through artificial isolation. I was quiet for several minutes, processing everything I'd heard and seen. Finally, I looked up at Webb and asked the question that had been building since my arrival. What do you really want? The truth, not the diplomatic version. Webb considered the question seriously before answering. We want what every species wants, observer. It's the freedom to grow, to develop, to reach our potential without artificial constraints imposed by others. He gestured toward the assembled representatives. Every species in this room was told they weren't ready for full participation in galactic civilization. Too primitive, too aggressive, too different. The Council maintained order by ensuring that only certain species could influence the direction of that order. The words hung in the air like an indictment, which they essentially were. The Alliance offers an alternative, a place where species are judged by their contributions, not their conformity to someone else's standards. I thought about the Council chamber, with its rigid hierarchies and unspoken rules about who could speak when and about what. Then I looked around this room, where representatives from hundreds of species participated as genuine equals. And if the Council refuses to adapt, Webb's expression was matter of fact, then they'll become irrelevant. Not through conquest or destruction, but through simple obsolescence. He was right, and we both knew it. The Alliance wasn't trying to destroy the Council, they were simply offering a better alternative. In a galaxy where choice had been artificially limited for centuries, genuine options were revolutionary. I'll carry your proposal back to the Council, I said finally. Thank you, though I should mention there's no particular urgency. The Alliance isn't going anywhere. As Elena escorted me back to my transport, I reflected on everything I'd witnessed. The humans hadn't just been expelled from the Galactic Council, they'd used that expulsion as an opportunity to build something better. 3 months ago, I'd watched what I thought was a diplomatic failure. Now I realized I'd witnessed the birth of a new galactic order. The Council could adapt or become a historical footnote. But either way, the galaxy had changed forever. And somehow I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry about that.